Welcome to Path History YouTube channel. To get regular notification, subscribe our channel and follow our official Facebook page. Our today's topic is literary sources of ancient Indian history. The past, like the present, is complex and can be looked at from many perspectives. Debate and disagreement are an important part of the growth of all forms of knowledge, and history is no exception. All historical interpretations are ultimately based on evidence derived from the sources of history, conventionally divided into two categories: literary and archaeological. Literary sources include all texts, long or short, written or oral. A text can be read in many different ways from a historical point of view. In the context of literary sources, we should keep in mind that languages have also histories and change with the times. Ancient Indian texts are sometimes divided into religious and non-religious or secular. But we should not be surprised to find an interweaving of what appear to be religious and non-religious themes and content in ancient texts. We are going to discuss some of the major literary sources for the history of ancient India. The Vedas have the status of Shruti, or that which has been heard. The category of Smriti, or which is remembered, Smriti texts include Vedanga, Purānas, epic or Mahākāvyas, Dharmaśāstra, and Niti-shastra. There are four Vedas: Rig, Sam, Yajurved, and Atharva. Books 2 to 7 of Rig Veda Samhita are considered the oldest. The latter portions of the Samhita, along with all the other Vedic texts, comprise later Vedic literature. Each Veda has four parts, the last three of which sometimes blend into each other: the Samhita, Brahmana, Aranyak, and Upanishad. The Rig Vedic Samhita is a collection of 1028 hymns or suktas arranged in 10 books or mandalas. The Samaveda consists of 1810 verses, mostly borrowed from Rig Veda, arranged according to the needs of musical notation. The Yajurveda deals with the details of the performance of rituals. The Atharva Veda is the latest Veda and contains hymns, some from Rig Veda, but also spells and charms which reflect aspects of popular beliefs and practices. The Brahmanas are prose explanations of the Samhita portions and give details and explanations of sacrificial rituals and their outcome. The Aranyakas interpret sacrificial rituals in a symbolic and philosophical way. The Upanishads contain a great variety of philosophical ideas about sacrifice, about the body and the universe, but are most closely associated with the concepts of Atman and Brahma. A number of supplementary texts known as Vedanga aimed at helping the proper recitation, use and understanding of Vedas. The major problem in using the Vedas as a source of history is the problem of dating the Rig Veda. Many historians take circa 1500 to 1000 BCE as the period of composition of early Vedic literature and circa 1000 to 600 BCE as that of later Vedic texts. And this theory was based on the tentative dates suggested by Max Müller. Vedic literature forms an important part of Brahmanical tradition, texts preserved and transmitted by a section of Brahmana males. It reflects their religious beliefs, practices, and points of view. As a source of history, these texts are used for information about life in parts of northwestern and northern India during the 2nd and 1st millennium BCE. But apart from the question of dates, there are several problems in correlating the evidence from the Vedas with archaeology. Ramayana and Mahābharata are the two Sanskrit epics, fall within the category of Smriti as well as Itihasa, that means traditional history. According to traditional belief, Ramayana was composed by Valmiki and Mahābharata was composed by Vyasa. The Ramayana is sometimes classified as Kavya or poetry. Similarities in language and style suggest that they emerged from common cultural milieu. The composition of Mahābharata can be placed between circa 400 BCE and circa 400 CE, and the Ramayana between the 5th or 4th century BCE and the 3rd century CE. More recently, Hiltevettel has suggested a shorter period of composition of Mahābharata from the mid-2nd century BCE to the year 0. It is not an easy task to identify their internal chronological layers. The setting of the Mahābharata is the Indo-Gangetic Divide and the Upper Ganga Valley, while in the Ramayana, the center of political gravity had clearly shifted eastwards to the Middle Ganga Valley. The strong woman characters of Mahābharata suggest an earlier stage of social development. The practice of Niyoga in the Mahābharata also suggests a social stage that is prior to that of the Ramayana, which reflects much stricter controls over women. So, some historians argue that the events and characters associated with the Mahābharata reflect a slightly earlier period than those of the Ramayana. The Mahābharata is truly an encyclopedic work, and it is boasts of these facts. The additions includes the sermon on Dharma given by Bhishma as he lay dying on a bed of arrows, and stirring discourse of Krishna to Arjuna on the eve of the war known as Bhagavad Gita. It is possible that there was a small-scale conflict transformed into a gigantic epic war by bards and poets. Some historians and archaeologists have argued that this conflict may have occurred in about 1000 BCE. The Ramayana exists in the form of two main recensions, northern and southern. The northern recension can be further divided into northeastern, northwestern, and Western. The language of the northern recension is more elaborate and polished than that of the southern one. Excavation at the site of Ayodhya have indicated the existence of a settlement here from the northern black polished ware or NBPW phase, which may go back at the earliest to circa 700 BCE. However, as with the Mahabharata, the archaeological evidence does not tell us whether there is any historical basis to the events or the characters of Ramayana. According to Richman, there are numerous other telling of Rama's story. A Jaina version, the Pamacharya of Bimalasuri in Prakrit, a Buddhist version, the Dasharatha Jataka in Pali, a 12th century Tamil version by Kamban, the Iramavataram, and the Ramacharitmanas, that is in 16th century by Tulsidas, to name only a few. While most scholars have focused on debating the historicity of their events, some have tried to describe their many different cultural layers. On the other hand, James L. Fitzgerald has argued that the Mahabharata was Brahmanical response to certain specific historical developments. The increasing popularity of religious tradition such as Buddhism and Jainism, and the rise of dynasties such as the Nandas and Mauryas, who extended support from them, were perceived by a section of Brahmins as threatening the Brahmanical order. There are 18 Mahapuranas or Great Puranas and many more Upapuranas or secondary Puranas. The origins of the Puranas may have overlapped to some extent with the Vedas, but their composition stretched forward into the 4th-5th centuries CE and in some cases even later. The Puranas are supposed to discuss 5 topics: the creation of the world or Sarga, recreation or Pratisarga, the periods of the various Manus or Manvantars, the genealogies of gods and rishis or Vangsha, and an account of royal dynasties, Vangshanucharita, including the Suryavamshi and Chandravamshi kings, whose origin is traced to the sun and the moon. The latter genealogies of kings of the Kali age have historical material. The account is given in the future tense in the form of a prophecy. The Vavishya Purana is mentioned in some Puranas as the original authority for the genealogies, although their details do not always match the Puranas, especially the Vayu, Brahmana, Brahma, Harivangsha, Matsya, Vishnu do provide useful information on ancient political history. They refer to historical dynasties such as Haryankas, Shaishunagas, Nandas, Mauryas, Shungas, Kanvas, and Andhras or Shatavahanas. They also mention certain kings with names ending in the suffix Naga, who ruled in northern and central India in the early centuries CE, about whom very little else is known. The dynastic lists end with the Guptas. The time is 4th to 6th centuries, indicating that most of the Puranas were compiled at about this time. The Purānas have accounts of mountains, rivers, and places which are useful for the study of historical geography. A special group of Sanskrit texts dealing specially with dharma are collectively known as Dharmaśāstra. These can be subdivided into three groups. The first two are Dharmasutras, composed during circa 600 to 300 BCE, and the Smritis, composed during 200 BCE to 900 CE. The third includes brief or tika and elaborate commentaries or bhashyas, collection with comments and conclusions, or nibandhas, and compendia of views from different texts or sangrahas, composed between 9th and 19th centuries. Apart from norms of social behavior, Dharmaśāstra deals with a number of other issues, including personal, civil, and criminal law. Although the Dharmaśāstra texts do not directly describe the society of their time, certain inference about social practices can be made on their basis. Early Buddhist literature is generally divided into canonical and non-canonical texts. Canonical texts are the books which lay down the basic tenets and principles of a religion or sect. There are Pali, Chinese, and Tibetan versions of the Tripitaka. The Pali Tripitaka of the Theravada school is the oldest of them all. The Tripitaka consists of three books: the Sutta, Vinaya, and Abhidhamma. Non-canonical Buddhist literature in Pali includes the Milinda Panha, 1st century BCE to 1st century CE, which consists of a dialogue on various philosophical issues between King Milinda, who is no doubt the Indo-Greek Menandar, and the monk Nagasena. The Pali or Sri Lanka Chronicles, the Dīpavaṁsha, which was composed between 4th and 5th centuries, and the Mahāvamsha, which was composed in 5th century, contain a historical mythical account of Buddha's life, the Buddhist councils, the Maurya Emperor Ashoka, the kings of Sri Lanka, and the arrival of Buddhism on that island. The trend towards the use of Sanskrit intensified the Mahayana schools, but some non-Mahayana texts were also composed in Sanskrit or mixed Prakrit Sanskrit. The Mahavastu, which has some Mahayana elements, gives a hagiography of the Buddha and describes the emergence of the monastic order in mixed Sanskrit Prakrit. The Lalita Vistara, which was composed between 1st and 2nd centuries, a hagiography of Buddha associated with the Sarvastivada school but strongly tinged with Mahayana elements, is in Sanskrit and mixed Prakrit Sanskrit. Buddhist texts are important sources for the history of Buddhism, its doctrines, monastic order, and royal patrons such as Ashoka, revealing many other facets of the polity, society, and economy of their times as well. Jaina literature offers information regarding the history and doctrines of Jainism, the doctrines of rival schools, the life stories of the saint, and the life of monks and nuns in the Sangha. The texts can also be used for information on other aspects of the cultural history of their times. Jaina texts have not, however, been studied or used as extensively by historians as Buddhist sources. Early Indian literature includes a number of masterpieces of poetry and drama. Such texts are used by historians as sources of information about the times in which they were composed. The earliest Sanskrit poets and playwrights include Ashvaghosha and Bhāsha. Ashvaghosha was the author of Buddha Charita. Bhāsha wrote several dramas including the Pancharatna, Dutavakya, Balacharita, and Shapna Vasavadatta. One of the most celebrated names among Sanskrit writers of the first millennium is that of Kalidasa, author of the dramas Abhigyana Shakuntalam, Malavikagnimitram, and poetic works such as the Raghuvamsham, Kumar Shambhavam, and Meghadutam. The major early medieval poets and writers include Bharvi, Rajashekhara, and the poetess Vijayanka. Ancient dramas on historical things are of special interest to the historians, although it is necessary to remember that they were plays and not historical accounts. Example: Vishakadatta's Mudra Rakshas and Devi Chandragupta. Narrative literature such as Panchatantra and the Kathasarit Sagara are collections of popular folk tales. There is a vast body of ancient and early medieval technical literature on varied subjects. Examples: Panini's Ashtadhyayi or grammar, the Patanjali's Mahābhāshya, Kautilya's Arthashastra, that is economic and political evidences of 4th century BCE, Aryabhatta's Aryabhattiya, Varahamihira's Brihat Samhita, Vatsyayana's Kamasutra, and Charaka Samhita by Charak, and Sushruta Samhita on medicines. The courts of early medieval kings attracted writers and poets, some of whom wrote biographical compositions in praise of their royal patrons. Example: Barnabhatta's Harshacharita, Bilhana's Vikramanka Devacharita. The accounts of the foreign travelers are also an important source of history. One of the most famous works is the Indica of Megasthenes. The book is lost, but later Greek works preserve paraphrases of some of its sections. The many Greek and Latin texts of the 2nd century BCE to the 2nd century CE referring to India include the works of Arrian, Strabo, and Pliny the Elder, and the anonymous Periplus Maris Erythrae or Periplus Tres Erythras Thalasus or Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. These texts are especially important for the history of Indian ocean trade. Many Chinese monks long overland journeys to India in order to collect authentic manuscripts of Buddhist texts. The best known among them are Fa Hien, Huensang, and I Ching. Later, not in the ancient period, Arab travelers like Al-Biruni also wrote about India, and those are also important sources of early medieval Indian history. Romila Thapar a renowned historian, has made a useful distinction between embedded and externalized forms of history. There are basic differences between the Western notion of history and Indian mythical versions of Itihasa. Moreover, Thapar points out that the embedded forms of historical consciousness tended to be connected with lineage-based societies and the externalized ones to state societies. There are some weaknesses of the writings of the foreign travelers because of their lack of knowledge about Indian subcontinent. It is important to remember about the texts that the form was changed time to time and many additional parts were incorporated several times, but overall historians used the sources and compared with the archaeological evidences and tried to structure history. So this is the end of our discussion. Subscribe our YouTube channel Path History and follow our official Facebook page. In case of any query, mail us. See the description box for the detail.